Hello. Today is May the 5th, 2022. My mother was born on this day in 1922, or as she would put it, 5522. So she would be exactly 100 years old today, if she was still alive. She died 2 days before her 81st birthday in 2003. Incredibly, that's 19 years ago, and yet, do you know, I still sometimes think for a nanosecond, oh, there's tennis on the telly, I must tell Mum, or I got the results of that medical thing, I'll give Mum a ring, before realising. But in these tiny ways, people live on. When I use some item of hers in the kitchen, or see an ornament that was hers on my shelf, or do something that I learned from her, and those things happen a lot, she's with me again for that moment. Her memory, her character, her spirit, I suppose. And so this little birthday tribute to her is a pleasure for me, an honour. Only when we stop talking about someone do they really die. Mummy, later Mum, Muv, and finally Mama, was born in Northampton, Joan Kathleen Izzard. And yes, her family did pronounce their surname that way. I took it as my professional name in my 20s when I was told I couldn't join equity with my father's surname, James, as there was already an actor called Jonathan James, and I had 24 hours to register as someone. I tweaked the spelling and style because I wanted to be an Izzard. My dad was miffed, but I swear it was purely pragmatic, Papa, no slight intended. My mother's father was Ernest Albert Geoffrey Izzard, Grampy to us. He was a rather forbidding man and would be referred to as Grumpy Grampy, but not to his face. As a child, I was once persuaded by Mum and Dad to give Grampy a tin of humbugs for Christmas, and it was only years later I realised I'd been duped into a sly tease about his character. Mum wasn't close to him, but she was devoted to her mother, Gertrude, known to us as Nanan. Mum almost worshipped her and was always trying to live up to her legacy of kindness and generosity. She feared falling short. I can vouch for the fact that she didn't. My memory of Nanan is almost nothing, a vague, plump, smiling, bespectacled presence, often in a beret. She died when I was 4. What I do remember, though, is being at home when Mum took a phone call, Solihull 5558, and was told that her beloved Nanan had died, hadn't survived an operation at hospital. And she cried. It was the only time in the 49 years I shared with her that I witnessed it, my mummy shedding tears. If she did cry at other times, she never let anyone see. She was determinedly bright, positive and optimistic at all times, as far as I know. Her mantra was, "Right, come along." And we did come along, because we trusted her. "Give someone a happy childhood and they'll have it for life," was a phrase she was fond of. Whether she coined it or was quoting someone else, I've no idea, but she gave us 3 exactly that. If there were difficulties creating those happy childhoods, and of course there must have been, she kept them hidden from sight. We only saw the gloss, the sheen, felt the wonderful energy. And her own childhood, as she told it, was full of jolly times. She wasn't academic, but loved sport and art and anything outdoors involving fresh air, water and animals. As a young woman, she was told by a fortune teller at the fair that when she grew up she would have 3 children. "Oh," she exclaimed, "I'd rather have 3 pigs." She told us stories of skating on frozen ponds, playing in the countryside, and climbing trees. That old-fashioned word tomboy seems to fit. On one memorable occasion, on the way home from school, she climbed up a lamppost to retrieve a hat thrown up there, much to the amazement of one of her teachers who happened to be passing by. She also liked the gaudy plumage of a peacock in the park so much that she coaxed it up to the edge of the enclosure, put an arm through the bars, and when it turned, grabbed a couple of feathers and pulled them out of the poor bird's body. She certainly had a no-nonsense approach. Mum taught at a local dance school and met my father when he came for lessons. I always had the impression that she set her cap at him, as the expression went, and whirled him around the floor until she had got him where she wanted. Enchanted. Dad proposed, was accepted, but then was called up and went off to India with the royal signals. I can't imagine how tough that must have been for both of them, sending letters that took weeks to arrive, making promises about the future, and hoping the war wouldn't end the romance before it had really begun. Mum joined the Land Army, digging, sowing, ploughing, milking, mucking in and mucking out, and she loved it. After she died, I found this letter from the Queen, thanking her for her loyal and devoted service, which had earned her the country's gratitude. Mum, an ardent royalist, would have been immensely proud of this, but it was tucked away with other bits and pieces. She never mentioned it. Dad came back to Blighty, the war ended, and in December 1945 they married in Northampton. She was only 23. Now the family grew. First my brother, born 9 months after the wedding, significantly, then my sister, and after a long gap, me. My memories of Mum when I was small are all of kindness, generosity and support, unconditional love, of colourful skirts I'd burrow into for comfort, of hugs and cuddles and touch. She loved to pat my calves or rub my earlobes, of busy activity and singing and chuckles of laughter. She wasn't one for sitting around. She might say, "I'm just going to have 5, or rest my eyes and put her feet up. Sometimes she'd have a cigarette, just the one a day. She said it helped her to slow down. Mum would sing as she went about the housework, which seemed to be constant. The cooking and cleaning and shopping and washing and ironing. There'd be a burst of song with a few lyrics, and then lots of la 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 until another few words that she knew, but all delivered with enthusiasm and joy. When I was ill in bed with mumps, I think, all swollen and sorry for myself, Mum would bring me soup or Lucozade and a copy of the Beano. She'd also sing me a lullaby to help me sleep. There was one song she sang beautifully with quite a lot of the right words. I loved hearing what I thought of as her song. But years later, I heard someone else singing it on the radio. Someone called Judy Garland. She'd stolen Mum's song Over the Rainbow. I've since forgiven Judy, but it was quite a shock. Oh, speaking of Judy Garland, one Christmas Mum wasn't well. That was a rarity in itself. I think she had flu, and because of that she got some of the presents mixed up. My sister got the cowboy outfit intended for me, and I got her present, the nurse's uniform. We were both perfectly happy and had no idea that they were wrongly assigned. Dewey was more than happy with the sheriff's badge, spurs and the gun, and I was delighted with the stethoscope, upside-down watch and a plastic syringe. Years later, Mum confided to my sister that she had worried if that was what had turned me gay. No, Mum. Sorry, but you can't claim the credit. Another shock I got from Mum was the concept that truth and untruth were not binary. I'd been invited up the road to Russell Templeton's birthday party. I didn't know Russell very well, but I did know the Templetons had a large Alsatian dog that scared me. What should I do? Well, Mum explained it was okay to pop a note through the door telling Russell that I wasn't feeling well. But Mummy, that's not true. No, she said, it was a white lie. A what? I'd always been told it was essential to tell the truth, not a lie. Had I stolen the biscuit, broken the plant, made that mark on the wall, yes or no? Now, suddenly, there was this new option, an alien concept, saying something I knew to be false, but crucially, it was apparently all right. What? Life could be very confusing. In fact, the Templetons sent me a little basket of goodies from the party, some cake and snacks and a toy, because I'd been too ill to go. I learned the concept of guilt that day too. Mum and Dad told me another white lie later. When I took the 11+ exam, they said there was no prize, I should just do my best and not expect any reward. Fine. But when I passed and got into the secondary school I wanted, they bought me a tennis racket for doing so well. A Dunlop match play with a brown flash design on the grip. Oh, I was so proud of that. Their white lie was fine by me. Mum had a way of making everything all right. If I bruised my leg, she'd kiss it better, or rub some butter on it. Magic, that always worked. If I was stung by a wasp, there would be a few wipes with a cut onion to take away the pain. The only real medication in the special corner cupboard was a silver thermometer and a blue tube of Savlon. That really was the hard stuff. She spoiled me, and I knew it. For being the youngest, being a mistake, maybe both. But when a chicken pie was served or a Battenberg cake divided, there would always be a bit extra for me. Somehow I had special treatment, got away with things my brother and sister never did. And there was encouragement and praise for the things I did that echoed her interests. I was good at passing exams, so I thought my dad would be satisfied. But when I came home and proudly announced that I'd come 7th in my class in some test, his comment was, who came top? And I can tell you now, it was Andrew Vickerman. That's how much his comment pricked me. Mum, on the other hand, was all well done and good boy, do your best and never mind, don't worry about it. And with that support, I grew the confidence to stand up in front of the junior school to sing Edelweiss or write and perform sketches or have a go at anything. Just as she'd taught Dad to waltz and foxtrot decades earlier, so she taught me to plie, pirouette and arabesque in ballet lessons at home for the local kids at 5 bob a week. I was the only boy in the class, and I loved it. She also taught us all to drive. She learned on tractors in the Land Army during the war, and she passed on her knowledge first to Dad, then my brother, my sister and me. I think we all passed the test first time. Kindness and laughter. Yes, she knew how tough life could be, keeping the marriage together after Dad had strayed, nearly losing her first child to asthma, nursing her daughter after life-threatening surgery. But she had a knack of finding the blessing in any situation. At her funeral, I said that she wasn't a glass half empty or half full person. Even if the glass clearly had nothing in it, Mum would say, "What a lovely glass. Let's put it on that shelf and watch the sun shine through it." And if the sun was shining, then she'd be out in the garden or on the tennis court. And if there was rain outside, she'd be very happy to stay in and polish all the silverware and the brass pots. She was never defeated, my mum. She loved to garden, never knew the Latin names of anything. They were nice little blue flowers or red berries in the autumn. But her fingers were green and she loved to get them dirty. If an inquisitive bird came to pick up worms as she turned the soil, so much the better. "Hello, little robin," she'd call, and I swear they responded to her chirrup. There was something of the young girl about my mum, the delight, wonder, cheekiness and sheer joy of life. It took a lot to knock the wind out of her sails. "I don't ever want to be old," she said once, in her late 70s. And you know, she never was. Mum would have called herself a housewife, receiving her housekeeping money every week from Dad. She didn't know how much he earned and just accepted what he gave her. But then, in 1974, at the age of 52, her father, Grampy, died and she inherited £3,000. For the first time in her life, she needed a bank account. When she approached Nat West in the village where Dad went, she was asked, "Mrs. James, does your husband know you're doing this?" Mum was so outraged she told them to forget it, went over the road to Barclays and opened an account there instead. Shortly after that, during a half-term break, she woke me one morning and said, "Jonty, come along. I need you to go with me. Share the driving." "Oh, all right, Mum. Where are we going?" "Norfolk." "Norfolk?" "Yes, I want to buy a house." And off we went. We got to Aylsham, the town she had chosen, and visited a few estate agents. £3,000, madam? No, I'm afraid we have nothing in that price bracket. If you could stretch to 10 or 15... No, that's all she had. I was embarrassed by these pointless encounters and tried to slink away, but she persisted. And eventually one of the agents said, "Well, there is a project in Hungate Street. It needs everything doing." "I'd like to see it," Mum said. "Can I have the key?" "Oh, you don't need a key, madam. There's no door." Well, we found it. It was boarded up, but we managed to climb through a window and looked around at what, to me, was a derelict waste of time. But Mum, positive and creative as ever, was muttering, "Yes, that could be the kitchen, a door there, maybe a wall here to create another bedroom. Oh, yes." And oh yes, it was. She bought it for £2,750 and began her career in property. Not in a big way, just seeing opportunities where others didn't, being positive, getting the heavy stuff done by a local builder, and doing a lot herself, painting and furnishing and planting, to create a bit of magic. It's what she did. Dad was, I think, appalled and always made sure the cottages she bought and sold were correctly identified as hers, not theirs. But she was fine with that too, proud of what she achieved. She bought and sold a few over the next 30 years in various villages in North Norfolk where we'd spent family holidays decades before at a remote coastguard's cottage. My sister and brother and I would play for hours and days on the cliffs and the beach, climbing, hunting, fishing and swimming. Seaweed and shells and special pebbles were treasured. Mum would come to the top of the cliff and call down that lunch was ready. It was usually cheese and tomato, and sometimes, for a change, she'd say it was tomato and cheese, which I said I preferred. I genuinely thought they were different. Her ashes and Dad's are scattered on that cliff top, a place of sunny memories. Give someone a happy childhood, and I'll have it forever. In the nearby town of Sheringham there was an auction room, Major Dunn's. We always seemed to visit on sale days, strangely. Dad said he lived in dread of hearing the gavel come down and the auctioneer announce, "Sold, Mrs. James." And we'd all have to parade out with pots and baskets and boxes of knickknacks because Mum had spotted one good piece among the rubbish. The penultimate house she owned was tucked away down a lane away from shops and village amenities. Lovely, but not practical, as Dad became ill with dementia. So she sold it and bought instead a little cottage in Sheringham itself, close to the beach, the shops, the theatre and the steam train. Now Dad could enjoy all those things in a short walk. I'm in that cottage now, and Mum is in every detail, every plate and jug, every bush and shrub. But it's not a mausoleum, no, she was never sentimental. If I break something of hers now, I flinch, but I can hear her voice, "Oh, don't worry, it was old anyway." When I came here shortly after she died and was pottering about in the front garden, an elderly chap walked past. He spotted me. "Do you live here now?" he asked. Yes, I do." He looked disappointed. "I used to like the woman who owned it before." "That was my mum," I said. I didn't know her, but I heard her singing over the fence. I shall miss her." "Me too," I said. Mum and Dad didn't have much money to spare. They would make do and mend. She would sew old sheets side to the middle to preserve their life, even if that meant having an annoying seam down the centre. The sewing, incidentally, was done on an old machine called 1066, because it was the one she'd had as a girl when she was multitasking, making a dress and revising the names of the kings of England for a history test. She still knew the rhythm: Willie, Willie, Harry, Stephen, Harry, Richard, John, Henry. She was once showing me a dress, not one she had made, but bought at the as-new shop. It would have been in bright, bold colours, they all were. I admired it, and for some odd reason asked her how much it cost. "A fair price," came the prim answer. In other words, none of your business. You see, money was a subject that was off-limits in our household, much like religion, sex, emotions, politics, feelings. We talked about school, food, weather, practical, safe things. In a speech I gave at Mum and Dad's golden wedding anniversary, I joked that in our family, if we were cross, we'd say crossly, "Pass the marmalade." And if we were happy, we'd say happily, "Pass the marmalade." Mum didn't even reveal to us as kids that she was afraid of fireworks. But somehow at the annual bonfire parties in our back garden, she always managed to be in the kitchen getting the baked potatoes or breaking the treacle toffee she had made with a hammer. Anywhere rather than out near the flashes and loud bangs. I had no idea until decades later that she was scared. I suppose she didn't want us to be fearful, to absorb her anxiety. So it wasn't easy to speak the truth about sexuality, but I was determined. When I told my parents by letter from university that I was gay, I got 2 envelopes back, one from him, one from her, and they both included the phrase, "We wish you hadn't told us." Gosh, that was a shock. It may not have been discussed much after that, but it was accepted, and that's what mattered. You know, it's very straightforward talking about my mum. She was an honest soul, full of energy and life, and generous to a fault. She'd say, with an air of amazement, People are so kind. But they were only reflecting what she had offered them. Flowers from her garden, a lift to the tennis club, the gift of something she knew would suit them. Just like her beloved Nanan, who always bought an extra half a dozen eggs when she did her shopping to give to a family up the road. And laughter. I know I keep saying it, but that's exactly what she offered. Always laughter. Apparently, I told Mum when I was about 10 that the only time I'd ever seen her serious was when she was painting. She favoured big, bold images in oil paints applied with a palette knife. It's a sadness to me that I don't have any of her pictures now. I hope, whatever walls they're hanging on, someone looks at them and appreciates their bright panache. Tucked among the piles of family photos, I found this, a typical shopping list in her solid, confident hand. Demerara sugar, coffee, grapefruit, marmalade, and so on. Notice there's something for the garden too. After she died, I found her diaries and took a peek, feeling disloyal. Each page contained small entries to record the day's events. It was usually tennis, gardening, coffee girls. I looked for the day of Dad's death a few years earlier. She had written Dawn, 6:30 p.m. and the names of me and my sister. Jonty and Dewey were there. Thank goodness I was all right. By all right, I think she meant she hadn't broken down, cried in front of us. In fact, when she arrived at the care home, just too late to be with Dad as he took his final breath, she bent over to kiss him and said quietly, with the immense love of lifetimes shared, "You old rascal." And she rubbed his earlobe in that way she used to with all of us. At his funeral, Mum asked everyone not to wear black, but something with colour in it. Even the undertaker, who managed to find a bottle green velvet suit with wide lapels that might have fitted him and might even have been in fashion 10 years earlier. And after the event, here we are in their garden, smiling and fooling around with garden tools. God only knows why, but it felt right. Laughter was not only still possible, it was necessary. Most of this is about life and light, laughs and hope, but there are things I regret. Perhaps by naming them now I can exorcise their corrosive power. One day when Mum was close to death at home in a bed downstairs so she could look out at her wonderful garden, I helped her to wash, gently sponging her, at least the parts she wanted me to see and to clean. It must have been as awkward for her as it was for me. She was private and discreet in such matters. She wanted me to wipe her bottom, as she had wiped mine as a child 1,000 times. But I couldn't. I couldn't do it. I vaguely dabbed the flannel over her hips and buttocks. "Right in," she said, in that no-nonsense way intended to bypass any squeamishness. But no, it was beyond me. I couldn't bring myself to perform that simple, kind task. I know she understood and forgave me, of course. Forgiveness and compassion flowed from her as easily as breath. Even so, sorry, Mum. Earlier, when Grampy was at our house and in the long, slow days of his own dying process, Mum said something to me and my brother about how much she had done that day looking after him and how tough she found it. And my response? I wince now with mortification. I said, "What do you want? A medal?" I know, it's shocking. How could I be so callous, so cruel, and at that time as her father was dying upstairs, to that amazingly selfless person? If I'm allowed a defence, all I can say is that it was a phrase I'd just learned, and I was trying it out, hoping to make my brother laugh. But any mirth has been swamped by years of regret for that puerile response. Sorry, Mum. I was, I'm afraid to say, similarly brattish the day Mum came home from shopping and announced, "Jonty, I've got something for you." "Oh, good," I said. "Can I eat it?" "No," said Mum. "It's from the As New shop. Something to wear." "Oh, I'm not sure I want to see it then." And I sloped off to my room to be a grotty teenager, listen to Radio 1 on my transistor and squeeze my spots. Several hours later, I came downstairs. "I'd like to see it now." Mum, lips pursed, said, "I'm not sure I want to show you now." I was shocked and rather impressed. Touché. She squished me with finesse, demonstrating all the crafty skills of one of her drop shots on the tennis court. When our standoff was over, probably only minutes later, she gave me a bag. In it was a bathrobe in multicolours of red and yellow and blue. I loved it. I loved it for years and years as I grew, squeezing into it until it finally fell apart. Sorry, Mum, and thanks. At her funeral, the vicar encouraged me not to whitewash my mother in the eulogy, and so I included the phrase, "She found it easier to talk than to listen." Again, I cringe at my insensitivity. It may have been true, but it's unkind, something she would never be. Mum, I'm so sorry. And I suppose that's it. Not too many regrets, really. Mostly fond memories of happiness and benevolence and a childlike wonder at the joy and possibilities of life. A simple life, you might say. No great career, no huge achievements. Apart from the most valuable of all, living with virtue, principle, delight and courage. Setting an example of a life well lived. That's not a bad epitaph. After Mum died, their house was silent. The rooms empty, the garden left to grow wild. The final flower arrangement dying with her. Objects were claimed or sold. Fruit bought would never be eaten. The birds would no longer be fed or encouraged with the call, "Hello, little robin." No laughs any more then? Oh yes, plenty of laughs still. We have the laughter in our ears and we smile when we remember her. Joan Kathleen Izzard, 100 years old today, and still so alive. Happy birthday, Mama.